Thank you so much, Oswald. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to GS1 and the National Advisory Group for organising this session today and for the opportunity to speak about the simplified trade system. Before I begin, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which I'm presenting today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So the simplified trade system, or STS, will simplify Australia's international trade regulations, modernise our ICT systems and strengthen our economic resilience. Our aim is to make cross-border trade cheaper, faster and easier for Australian businesses and make Australia more competitive on the global stage. And to reassure those of you who may have been involved in the various trade reforms over the last decade, you'll be pleased to hear that the task force is responsible for leading this work in a much more integrated way at a whole of government, in fact, whole of nation level. We're not attempting to lead this independently, though. We're working with many Commonwealth agencies to collaboratively deliver this transformation. We have an experienced task force team with members drawn from 11 Commonwealth government agencies, and we're working with states and territories to ensure that we're joined up across all levels of government. We're also working closely with the STS Industry Advisory Council, or IAC, which is led by Paul Little AO. Paul's got exhaustive and extensive experience in freight and logistics and, of course, cross-border trade. And the IAC was established by the government to provide advice on Australia's cross-border trade environment. Its members are drawn from a broad range of businesses involved in cross-border trade, and they have broad and deep business networks that are assisting in our transformation efforts. With that said, we've already been working directly with business as well, with more than 50 separate business interviews conducted to this point, and broader engagement like the STS Town Hall we held a couple of weeks ago, and roundtables have provided important insights into the task force. As part of these engagements, we've heard clear messages about difficulty in finding and understanding requirements and needing to provide information many times, often using paper, a lack of transparency and inconsistent service experiences that often resulted in interruptions and delays, and challenges in navigating complex regulations and inflexible and hard-to-use systems. Before I get into the details of what the task force is doing and why, I wanted to quickly acknowledge Oswald's comments because our purposes are very much aligned. We, like the ICC, support a simplified trade environment and the need to build on existing and potential conversations between the public and private sectors. This is really going to help us resolve issues and ensure that we all continue to get closer to achieving the same aims. And none of this, though, can be achieved without clear data standards, either existing or new, which enable high levels of interoperability, which is the theme of today's session. So moving into the detail, I'd like to dig into what the STS will deliver to you and the economy more broadly. We've got the key outcomes up on the slide now. Those 4 outcomes are creating simpler and more streamlined trade processes, which is all about saving time and money when people interact with government, and for us to reduce barriers to entry to help more businesses trade. And that is going to be particularly helpful for small and medium enterprises that don't necessarily have the scale to be able to deal with the complexity that currently exists. Secondly, it's about a more resilient trade system and making sure that it can support the operational demands of today's operating environment, which is very different to what it was pre-COVID. Thirdly, having modern and globally competitive trade processes. We're looking internationally to make sure that we take the best practices from all of our trading partners to ensure that our processes are as modern and globally competitive as they can be. And finally, supporting Australia's economic resilience. We'll support Australia's economic resilience through helping business focus on trade growth and diversification to improve productivity. I should also mention that while the STS is genuinely working at a whole of government, whole of nation level, we're not able to address each and every issue in the end-to-end global trade supply chain. The STS is focused on regulations, we're focused on ICT systems, the data flows and the standards that support them. But broader issues such as sea and air freight capacity and cost, domestic infrastructure performance and FTAs are outside of the current STS scope. While they're outside of our scope, we are capturing all of the issues that we discover and we're making them visible to government and relevant agencies for them to consider and potentially treat. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So to ensure that our future cross-border trade system is effective and sustainable, we're working to 6 key focus areas, which you'll see on the screen. First and foremost, we're focused on designing a system where the business experience is intuitive and simple when interacting with government. Secondly, we're focused on creating a regulatory environment where the rules are simpler, they're fit for purpose and independent of the technology and process. We're focused on digitisation, and we've heard a bit about that earlier, where we'll have modern connected systems, including business systems and other trade-related participants such as banks and trade financing providers. Fourth, we're focused on ensuring that data is shared between government agencies where appropriate, of course, to reduce the burden on business. And this needs to be supported by harmonised data standards which are aligned internationally. I agree with Maria's earlier statement that data is king. I think effective use and sharing of data will be fundamental to transforming our cross-border trade environment. Fifth, we're focused on ensuring that the right funding models are in place so that charges are fair and sustainable. And finally, we're focused on ensuring that we've got a workforce that's capable, skilled and adequately resourced. We're not starting from a blank sheet. We are drawing on the work that's already been conducted across government. We're building on what's working well and complementing the trade reforms that are already underway. And we're providing advice to government on how to get the biggest bang for its buck with new investments. I know that agencies such as the Department of Agriculture have briefed NGTAG on their cross-border trade reforms. To clarify, we're pulling together these reforms under the STS banner to ensure that we're taking a fully integrated approach. We're also working with the border agencies, including the Border Force and Agriculture, as they continue to play a critical role in the delivery of the STS reform agenda. This approach is ensuring that we don't try and solve problems that have already been solved or ask questions that we already know the answer to. So let me dig a little more into our approach. Let's move to the next slide. So at the highest level, the government has asked the task force to assess the current border trade environment, to co-design the future state with business and government, and to advise on the optimal path between where we are now and where we need to be. This has been delivered across 3 phases, and these are running in parallel. So first of all, what have we got? That's our baseline, which we're very close to finalising. Since July, we've been mapping current regulations, processes and systems, and I'll come back to some of the findings in a moment. We're determining their effectiveness, their durability and the life cycle of each, and importantly, we're determining what the government has already invested in and committed to so that we can align, coordinate and integrate these reforms to extend beyond organisational portfolio boundaries. Secondly, what we're aspiring to be. So in parallel with phase 1, we've commenced designing our future state cross-border trade environment. As mentioned, our view is that an effective trade environment needs to be simple and more integrated, underpinned by modern systems with high levels of digitisation and data sharing. And phase 3 is about mapping the path from where we are today to where we need to be. And we are right in the middle of that phase right now. This involves showing the path and incremental building blocks that we believe would be necessary for government to be able to achieve the desired target state. This is all happening now, and we've already been providing advice to government, despite the task force only being in place since the 1st of July. So we've just had our 5th month anniversary. Last month, we provided a set of regulatory reform proposals that will help business in the short to medium term. We provided an interim strategic work plan to align, coordinate and integrate the STS reforms. And this gets to this key deliverable, which is the plan to move from where we are to where we need to be. And we recommended a set of further investments where we saw gaps. This was part of an integrated package that aimed to address some of the immediate pain points for Australian business and invest in areas that will help to achieve better quality outcomes for both business and government and deliver broader economic benefits. For the budget next year, we'll deliver a full baseline of our current regulations, processes and systems. We'll present options for a whole of government Tell Us Once digital service for government's interactions with imports and exports. And we quite deliberately have not called that single window because Tell Us Once is the concept that is most important here. And then proposals for future regulatory reform, and they will be in the short to medium term. Having the task force lead this work is letting us be much more coordinated, more integrated, and focus clearly on the business of trade rather than the structures of government. It's also allowing us to engage more effectively with international standard setting bodies, which underpins many of the modern cross-border trade systems. When it comes to timing, we've benchmarked internationally. The fastest any comparable country has worked through this level of trade simplification is Singapore. It took them about 8 years, 3 in planning and piloting, and 5 more to fully implement. The US and the UK, as I'm sure you'd be aware, have also both recently announced work on trade modernisation and trade single windows. Their operating environments are very similar to ours in many ways, so we'll continue to work with them, monitor their programs, and ensure that we engage and learn and ensure that we interoperate where we should be interoperating. But as I'm sure you'd appreciate, good things take time. Although we're moving at warp speed and planning to deliver in increments, the full transformation of our cross-border trade environment will take several years. I'd like now just to dig a little more into business engagement, which is where we need you and your networks to be involved so that we can learn, co-design, implement and review. So your input combined with a determination to transform the business of cross-border trade will allow us, I think, to recommend well-targeted investments to government. Creating that end-to-end view of the cross-border trade environment is no small task, though. It requires us to look beyond the traditional agency boundaries to understand the trade experience. And this spans from trying to find information through to securing the relevant permissions, shipping goods, getting them cleared and released either here or overseas, and ultimately seeing them delivered to their target destination. Now, businesses have already told us that they can't always find or understand the information required for import or export. The seafood importer told us that they had to search multiple websites for information that was often outdated and hard to navigate. This particular importer often spends days trying to find the right information, and when they can't, they often find it hard to find somebody who can help. We also know that time is critical for traders. Many think and operate in minutes and hours rather than weeks and months. So we aim to provide greater speed and certainty while at the same time making sure that our borders remain protected. We spoke with a large importer of fresh produce, and they explained to us that they typically see import clearance times of less than half a day, but it can sometimes extend to 3 or 4 days. And we know that this kind of uncertainty costs business money, and it impacts overall confidence in the end-to-end cross-border trade supply chain. We're also very aware that there are 28 separate Commonwealth agencies with an interest in cross-border trade. This is in addition to states and territories. None of these have a single end-to-end view. And so businesses often need to contact multiple agencies or even multiple areas within a given agency to progress a single shipment. This is why we're not focusing on interactions with individual agencies, we're looking at the experience of traders. We're also very aware, and we've talked a little bit about digitisation, that there are still many paper-based processes to support cross-border trade, such as obtaining health certificates. To get a health certificate for exporting seafood, a business that we'd spoken with submits its information by email to the relevant department several weeks before they need to export. Once the certificate is ready, they need to send a representative to the regional departmental office to collect the paper certificate from a physical shop front. And this process often takes several weeks and involves significant costs, and it takes them away from their core business. It is not all bad, though. We know that there are many examples where cross-border trade systems and processes are running well. We're committed to preserving and building on the good and making sure that this translates into greater consistency in the service experience. Finally, my call to action to you. So next slide, please. While we're well on the way to finalising our baselines, as I've mentioned, and we've commenced work on the future state design, we're keen to learn more about what's working well, what isn't, and the opportunities for improvement, whether that be regulatory, ICT or process. The government's given us the end-to-end accountability, and we need your advice to support and deliver against this. As part of the broader engagement strategy, we've just released the public consultation paper. We want your input on what's working well and what isn't. We also want to hear your thoughts on potential innovation and what you most need to see in a future cross-border trade environment. Submissions are due by the 14th of January, so time is tight, but we do need to move quickly, and so that's the reason for the very tight deadline. Ultimately, we know that Australia's cross-border trading environment is falling behind the rest of the world, and we in the STS are determined to make it better. I think it'll benefit all of us as individuals, as businesses, and as a nation. Thank you, and I think we're now moving into the panel session with Patrick.